So, for years, the industry narrative around Star Wars was becoming quite simple. Streaming was the future, and movie theaters were becoming a bit of an afterthought. After The Rise of Skywalker closed out the sequel trilogy in 2019, Lucasfilm effectively pulled the plug on its theatrical slate and retreated into the content mill of Disney+. It was a strategy that seemed to work, at least on paper. Shows like The Mandalorian became the bedrock of the streaming platform, and for a while, the Wednesday night drop became a ritual for millions of fans. But as of this past Memorial Day weekend, that 7-year experiment has hit a bit of a wall. When The Mandalorian and Grogu pulled in $82 million for its domestic opening, it wasn't the triumphant return that Disney executives were banking on. In fact, it officially became the lowest opening Star Wars film in the modern era, falling even behind the infamous Solo: A Star Wars Story. According to data from The Numbers, the film's $165 million production budget, while disciplined by modern standards, is barely being met by its initial global haul, proving that streaming popularity doesn't always translate into real-world ticket sales, something that you would have thought Disney might have learned by now. The root of this disconnect is effectively what you would call in marketing audience conditioning. Disney spent years training viewers to see Mando and Grogu as home entertainment, content that comes free with their $7 to $15 a month subscription. When the studio tried to pivot that habit into a $20 per ticket theatrical experience, you can say that they ran into a wall of consumer resistance. And perhaps the worst thing about that is that resistance was on multiple fronts. There's people who just don't like Star Wars anymore. There's also people who don't like the last couple of seasons of The Mandalorian. But even for the people who aren't necessarily Star Wars fatigued, there is such a thing as wallet fatigue. As Deloitte's 2026 Media and Entertainment Outlook highlights, consumer spending on streaming has flatlined. And with subscription prices rising across the board, audiences are becoming increasingly selective about what they'll pay extra for. And you can easily trace the tension back to the corporate boardrooms. The industry is currently in the middle of a massive efficiency era, defined by the kind of bruising layoffs we saw throughout April 2026, layoffs that continue to occur up until this day. Companies like Disney and Sony are slashing thousands of jobs and consolidating their marketing operations, trying to squeeze profit out of a landscape that is no longer growing at the explosive rate of the pandemic years. In this climate, studios are playing it safe. They're prioritizing risk mitigation over big swing-for-the-fence cinematic events. That strategy, however, has a side effect, a uniform visual structure, if you will. When a studio optimizes a project to minimize potential losses, the end result often feels more like a polished high-end television episode than a transformative event that you must see on an IMAX screen, or just a big theater screen in general. Ultimately, Disney finds itself at a crossroads that feels eerily familiar to anyone who watched the Marvel machine go through a similar cycle. They've successfully turned one of their biggest intellectual properties into a sometimes reliable, but sometimes far from it, consistent content machine. But in doing so, they've lost some of the event-level prestige that used to make a Star Wars movie feel essential. Whether this serves as a wake-up call to prioritize theatrical craftsmanship over streaming volume, that remains to be seen. But for now, the data is clear. In an age of infinite content, being good enough for a streaming algorithm isn't the same as being essential enough for a theater.